Well, howdy folks. It is very warm in my house and the air is really dry, which has dried out my hair, which is why I'm wearing the hat. And my voice is starting to go a little bit. I have no idea why. You probably won't be able to hear it, but I can hear it. So I've got some hot tea, which should hopefully clear it up. But screw it, I'm going to record 2 reviews today. Because I have a goal. I have a goal to, by the time the 4-week In Too Deep special event is over, to be completely caught up on my Steven Universe reviews. That means I must get from Winter Forecast all the way to whichever episode is right before Nightmare Hospital. I want to say Friendship, but I'm not sure. It's going to be a lot of episodes, but I think I can do it. And, I kind of figure if I have a concrete goal, I'll get these reviews out more often, which is always a good thing. Now, I'm going to really push myself, at least at first, and try to find the time to get all of these reviews out before In Too Deep starts, but honestly, I don't see that happening. That said, let's move right into Winter Forecast. This is another Connie episode, which of course I'm always up for. And as the title suggests, it is winter, and they're hanging out, and they're just being Steven and Connie. It's an adorable scene. I don't need to explain why. At least I hope I don't. But Connie gets a call. She needs to come right home because there's a blizzard moving in, and if she doesn't come home now, she's going to be snowed in. Steven, of course, does not want her to go, so he starts making excuses, and Garnet tells him that he needs to make the right choice, and then she kisses him on the forehead, and there's this little sparkly effect, and uh-oh, what just happened? Could it possibly be that Garnet is trying to actively parent Steven? Nah, it can't be. That never happens. I'm kidding, obviously. But anyway, Steven and Connie go to the car wash. They can hop in Greg's van and he can take Connie home. But Steven, still not wanting Connie to have to go home yet, starts procrastinating by convincing Greg he needs to change his clothes so as to better impress the Maheshwarns. And Greg buys it for some reason. And by the time they finally leave, the snow is now high enough that they spin out and get stuck on the side of the road. So Greg makes the incredibly responsible decision, responsible in air quotes, to march through the snow late into the night to Connie's parents' house in a blizzard. Greg, no offense, buddy, but I kind of see why the Gems want to raise Steven themselves. They're worried that you're going to get him killed. And they go on dangerous missions on like a weekly basis. Anyway, they get to Connie's parents' house. Her parents are worried about them. Obviously, it's been much later than they expected by the time they get home. And Connie is now sick, and it's all a disaster. There's a very real chance that Connie's not going to get to spend time with Steven anymore. And then all of a sudden, they're back in the van. And it's at this point that the audience, I hope, has kind of caught on to what's going on here. Garnet's sparkly forehead kiss actually transferred her future vision to Steven for just an instant. Just long enough for him to look at a couple of decision points. Because back in Future Vision, they tried really hard to explain exactly what Future Vision was, but they didn't do quite a good enough job. Because the version of clairvoyance they went with in this show is very much a version that exists in science fiction rather than a version that exists in fantasy. I'm going to try to explain it very briefly here. It's based on something called the Everett's interpretation of quantum physics. It's the theory that for each decision we get the opportunity to make throughout our lives, every possible outcome of those decisions actually happens, just in different universes. And a lot of people think that this interpretation, also known as the many worlds interpretation, is entirely fictional because it's the one that's most interesting to use in fiction. This is the interpretation of quantum physics which allows for the existence of parallel universes. Because as the theory goes, let's say I have to decide whether or not to go to the grocery this Saturday or this Sunday. Now, assuming that either way this trip to the grocery is going to be just like any other trip to the grocery, the most that's really going to be different here is what I have for dinner that Saturday night. But based on Everett's interpretation, I actually go to the grocery Saturday and Sunday because at the moment that I make the decision which day to go, a new universe is created where I make the other decision, the one that I didn't make here, in my own universe, which is kind of a misnomer because they're technically both my own universe, but you get the point. And then subsequently, for each decision I would make on the way to the grocery store and each decision I would make at the grocery store, new universes are created so that each outcome to each of those decisions can actually happen in a different universe. And now, with the kind of mundane decisions that people make on a day-to-day basis, you're going to end up with a lot of universes which are effectively exactly the same. But imagine a universe where Napoleon decided not to invade Russia, or Japan decided not to bomb Pearl Harbor, or the Allies decided not to take the huge risk that was the D-Day invasion, or the United States decided not to drop the atomic bomb on Japan. That's a lot of World War II references, but you get my point. Some decisions have a much greater impact on the world than others. The gems being who they are and what they do, their decisions have a huge impact on what happens to the world around them, which is where Garnet's power comes in handy. She literally is able to visualize these decision points through some sort of psychic ability, and then actually, literally, see the outcomes of those decisions, all of the possible outcomes of those decisions, allowing her to choose which outcome she wants the most, and then pursue. And now some people didn't get that from the description in the episode Future Vision, but here we literally see, from Steven's point of view, how Future Vision works. He actually gets to visualize the potential outcomes to his decisions. So this time when the van crashes again immediately after Steven jumps back in time, or his perception jumps back in time, I guess, because he's not really moving through time here. When the idea of trekking through the snow is brought up again, Steven shoots it down and suggests that they just wait out the storm in the van, which isn't a terrible idea. But now, because they never get back to Connie's house at all, and no one thought to call her parents and tell them what was going on, her dad, who I guess is a terrible driver in the snow, heads out into the blizzard, ends up spinning out, crashing into Greg's van, and they all die. Good job, Steven. Great choice. Which leads to Steven's perception jumping back in time to an earlier choice that was made. His choice to either procrastinate and keep he and Connie there as long as possible, or to leave. But because he still wants to spend as much time with Connie as possible, instead of saying, hey, we've got to leave right now if we're going to make it there before the storm hits, he decides that the best course of action is to go back to his house, and he and Connie stay there, and they'll call her parents and let her know what's going on. Everything, you know. He seems to be covering all of his bases at this point. But then we find out that the gems decided to take this Steven-free evening to get some gem stuff done. They have the shooting star from Monster Buddies, and they intend to warp it to the Galaxy Warp and completely destroy the Galaxy Warp, which already gives us a pretty decent indication of how powerful this explosion is going to be, because the Galaxy Warp is quite large. And some people have wondered why, if they intended to send the shooting star to the Galaxy Warp this evening, the Galaxy Warp still exists later in the series. They think that casts doubt upon this interpretation of Future Vision, but I'll get to why that's not true in a minute. The point is, Steven distracts them, they drop the shooting star, and everyone dies. Good job, Steven. Good choice. So now, having seen his friends and family die twice, Steven decides maybe they should try to beat the storm back to Connie's house. This being reality again now, we do see him come out of the Future Vision, and Garnet kind of explains what she did, but she doesn't really have to because Steven gets it. So he grabs Connie, he says, we gotta leave right now. He runs to Greg's van, they all jump in, they all drive back to Connie's place, they get there before the storm, everything works out fine, and Connie's parents, seeing how responsible Greg and Steven have been, even invite them to stay the night, so that they don't have to drive back in the storm, which shows that Connie's parents, despite all their flaws, are still more responsible than Greg. That's not a sentence I ever wanted to say. But yeah, so they end up sleeping on the couches in the living room, and Connie comes out in the middle of the night, and she and Steven have this really cute moment. It's very touching, very, very nice, very well handled. And that's the episode. And I really like this episode. It's not one of the standout episodes of the series. It's another one of those learn about a gem power episodes, except it's not one of Steven's powers, it's one of Garnet's powers. But that aspect of the plot is handled really well in a very visual manner that lets us figure out what's happening for ourselves, and which leads to us coming to understand the power even better than we would have if we had just been told about it. Obviously, because we've already been told about it, and there were still questions left up in the air about exactly how it worked. But it also serves to be a really great character building episode for Steven, because we get to see him learn more about responsibility here. In that moment where he had to consider all the ramifications of his decision to either go or stay, he grew up a little bit. He became a bit more responsible. He became less of a child and more of an adult without losing anything that makes him what he is. So not only was it a great episode for explaining something of the gems to the audience, which despite the fact that they do it a lot, I still always look forward to it. It's just a genuinely great character building episode. And the one complaint that people have about this episode, the issue of why is there still a Galaxy Warp if Steven never interrupts the gems, I don't see as an issue, and I'll explain that right now. Because when Steven first shows up and sees them standing around the warp, or I guess sitting around the warp with the shooting star getting ready to send it to the Galaxy Warp, you see Pearl trying to convince the others that this is too risky, especially when the Galaxy Warp isn't the only way for the homeworld gems to get to Earth in the first place. That they might want to rethink this course of action. Obviously, the reason that they never sent the shooting star to the Galaxy Warp is because Pearl succeeded in convincing Garnet not to send the shooting star to the galaxy warp? It's literally right there in the episode. It's one of those questions that is already answered for us. It's a question we don't need to be asking, like the question of where did Steven's healing powers go? It's right there in the episode. He lost confidence in them, so he can't use them anymore. They didn't send the shooting star to the galaxy warp because Pearl convinced them not to send the shooting star to the galaxy warp. With all the questions that there are that we could be asking about this show, I just don't understand why some people insist on asking questions that are already answered. That said, guys, if you have seen this episode, what did you think about it? Let's get a discussion going in the comments section down below. Either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.